Rick, it has been said that the United States is the most corrupt nation the world has ever seen. I would like to propose that virtually all of that corruption stems from one root cause.
Just one?
You'll never guess what it is.
Well, of course I know what it is, Dick. I've seen the script.
Well, humor me then.
All right, Dick. What is the single root cause of virtually all the corruption of the United States?
It's the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where Napoleon was defeated by the Duke of Wellington.
Now, how could a 19th century European skirmish that lasted less than a day possibly be the cause of the United States becoming so corrupt?
It's true that the battle lasted only 8 hours, but that was time enough for the opportunistic Rothschilds to acquire total control of the British government. Here's how it happened. Early in the battle on the morning of June 18th, 1815, Napoleon appeared to be winning, and this impression was conveyed to London in the war's first secret military report. But when Prussian reinforcements arrived later that day, the tables turned in the favor of Wellington.
Now, as I recall, the Rothschilds had their own intelligence-gathering network that used private couriers, right?
Right.
And it was faster than the regular mail, so they could get economic and political news before anyone else, including the European monarchs and government officials. Nathan Rothschild, in fact, had agents on both sides of the battlefield to get the most accurate and timely information possible.
As soon as the tide turned against Napoleon in the late afternoon, a Rothschild courier took off for England. Nathan Rothschild himself met the courier when he docked his boat 2 days later.
The future of Europe was at stake, Dick. Enormous fortunes stood to be made or lost solely on the outcome of the battle. All eyes and ears at the London Stock Exchange anxiously awaited the news. With her economy already decimated by years of war, if Britain lost, her government bonds would plummet in value. France would be the master of the European front. But the bonds would soar to new heights with a Wellington victory, and Britain would dominate Europe and could expand its influence widely.
With everyone else thinking that Napoleon was winning, Rothschild, knowing that Wellington had already won, immediately started selling all of his holdings on the English stock market. When others saw what he was doing, they also began selling what they thought were worthless consols of paper money for gold and silver, trying to retain at least some of their wealth. As a result, stock prices dropped to 5 cents on the dollar.
And at the very last minute, Rothschild had his agents secretly purchase all the stocks they could for next to nothing. When Wellington's envoy later arrived at the War Office with the news that Napoleon had been soundly defeated, the value of the British bonds shot up beyond their original value. Within a matter of hours, Nathan Rothschild's already substantial fortune had ballooned by a factor of 20. And because he had purchased most of the stocks, the Rothschild family had gained complete mastery of the British economy. This forced the British to establish a new Bank of England, which of course Nathan Rothschild controlled.
As a result of the Battle of Waterloo, the Rothschilds gained control of England, the most powerful nation in the world at that time. And over the next 2 centuries, their fortune has grown exponentially, and today is estimated to equal an inconceivable $100 trillion. Some people believe it is closer to $200 trillion. That gargantuan wealth and the $20 trillion the Rockefellers control have allowed the international bankers literally to control the entire world. These bankers have the money to corrupt every corruptible politician and nation on earth. And because the United States has been the bastion of freedom, they have particularly targeted our country for control. As a result, the bankers have completely corrupted the United States government, all to support their agenda for world government.
And here's some more history, Dick. Some people say that the Constitution and the Founding Fathers are irrelevant to modern times, but nothing could be further from the truth. The Founding Fathers had great insight into human nature, especially where greed was concerned. Here is a quote by Thomas Jefferson. "If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered."
So, what did Jefferson know that most Americans today do not know? What made him so smart?
Well, Dick, I think in this case, a better word than smart would be prescient, perceiving the significance of events before they occur. Jefferson and the other founding fathers studied history and government, so they had a good idea not only of what to do when creating government for their new nation, the United States, but what not to do.
It was Sir Joseph Stamp, a director of the Bank of England in the early 20th century, who said, "The bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money, and with the flick of the pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. However, take away from them the power to create money, and all the great fortunes like mine will disappear, for this would be a happier and better world to live in. But if you wish to remain the slave of the bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create money."
That is why the authors of the Constitution gave Congress the power to coin money. They didn't give it to the bankers. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, said, "History records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent plans possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance."
Dick, true to the warnings of Jefferson and Madison, history records that over the last 2 centuries, many people worked to win their political freedom from monarchies. But at the same time, the major banking families of the world, such as the Rothschilds, were trying to neutralize the trend toward representative government by setting up dynasties of political control. Of course, they did all this in the background, away from public view, in the form of international financial combines.
These international banking dynasties had learned that governments must borrow money during emergencies, and that loaning money to governments and kings was much more profitable than loaning it to private individuals. The government loans were not only bigger, but they were secured by the nation's taxes. By conditionally providing such funds from their own private resources, these bankers could gradually bring both kings and democratic leaders under their control.
And having an emergency is key, Dick, because it generates the urgency for governments to borrow enormous amounts of money. And if there isn't a handy natural emergency around, the bankers simply create one.
Such as financial panics or depressions.
And wars, and terrorist attacks, often using the false flag technique of planning and funding an attack and blaming it on some target group that is usually innocent. War has always been the ideal emergency for them. So since the early 1800s, the bankers have been in the business of fomenting wars.
And funding both sides at the same time. National patriotism and loyalty means nothing to these bankers. The only loyalty these people have is to money and power.
So to gain control of governments, the bankers use designer emergencies to force them to become dependent on their loans. As Proverbs says, the borrower is servant to the lender.
It was Mayer Amschel Rothschild who is reputed to have said, quote, "Let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes its laws."
And the time-honored means of controlling a nation's money, Dick, is by creating a monopoly on the issuance of all money. The globalists do this through the concept of central banking.
In November of 1910, less than a century after the Battle of Waterloo, 7 men met for 9 days in extreme seclusion at a resort on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. The purpose of this meeting, Rick, was to draft what became the Federal Reserve Act, the legislation that would establish a central bank and fiat currency, money by government decree in the United States.
Now, Dick, before we go any further, we should say that central banking has been used historically by power-hungry moguls to gain control of entire countries, and as we shall see, the Federal Reserve, being a central bank, is no exception.
The 7 men traveled from New Jersey to Georgia in Senator Aldrich's luxurious private railroad car. The Jekyll Island meeting was so secretive that the participants used aliases during the trip to and from Georgia. And whenever the servants were within earshot, they addressed each other only by first names. Let's take a quick look at who these men were.
Senator Nelson W. Aldrich, the Republican whip in the Senate, business associate